Call.
Mr. President.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to make a contribution on this bill. I do so as a son, as the brother of two sisters, as the father of two daughters, as the friend of many women I know personally and professionally who have enriched and shaped my life. And I think, and I hope in the contribution that I make today, I speak in support of them, because this bill is about the personal autonomy and agency of women. The women who are our friends, our relations, our partners and lovers, who seek to attend reproductive health facilities, and as we've heard here today, do so for quite a wide spectrum of reasons, and not only to obtain a termination of pregnancy. This legislation is premised upon a simple idea: that women should be able to access needed medical services without being accosted, harassed or intimidated in any way. As we've heard the Honourable Shane Mallard say, and others, this legislation is not about the legality of abortion or whether the current state of the law should be changed. We've had that debate on that matter in this place not long ago. But in this debate, what we've heard predominantly raised against this bill is that it is somehow an infringement against fundamental rights and freedoms. The right to political communication, religious freedom, we've heard. And we've heard some contributions waxing lyrical about High Court cases and other high constitutional principles. Let's be very clear. This is a nonsense. But before I develop that argument, let us just look at the issue of fundamental rights and freedoms that have been debated in this House. And I'm not the first member in this debate to make this point. Where was that concern in 2012 when this Parliament enacted electoral funding reforms, restricting the right to make political donations only to natural persons on the electoral roll and depriving many other civic societal institutions of the right to participate and be heard? Where was that spirit at 2:24 a.m. this morning as we were debating yet further electoral funding reforms, even in the shadow of those earlier reforms having been struck down by the High Court? And as the Honourable Trevor Khan in his contribution today made the telling point as to where that concern was when this Parliament, not with the support of this side of the House, but this Parliament enacted the mining protest laws providing for imprisonment of persons offending against that statute of up to 7 years in jail. And I note a previous speaker did suggest that my side of politics likes to sort of have its cake and eat it too, because we opposed each of those other changes, whereas we as a party are supporting this bill. And I will return to that earlier point because this bill does not infringe on fundamental rights and liberties, and I'll try and develop that argument in as intelligible way as I am able. Because I acknowledge that interjection. But the fact is that we're not just talking here about what any one of us might colloquially look at as a right or a moral right. What we're talking here about in relation to fundamental rights and freedoms is those rights which have been recognised by law and by the High Court in particular. So in the case of the Unions New South Wales versus the State of New South Wales, it went through the whole history of Longy, the ABC and the ACTV case to look at where this implied freedom of political communication actually came from and what it was about. And in the ACTV case, Justice Brennan spoke of the need for there to be a free flow of political communication so that electors may form judgments. And Chief Justice Mason stated that it was only through the uninhibited publication can the flow of information be secured and the people informed. And this was all about maintaining the integrity of the electoral process underpinning the system of representative government. Because unlike in the United States, the right, the implied freedom is protected in Australia by law only insofar as it maintains the integrity of the system of representative government. So the question posed by Lange is whether a piece of legislation burdens the freedom, either in its terms, in its operation or in its effect. And so you have to then look at, to work this out, you need to determine whether the legislation at issue is reasonably appropriate and adapted or proportionate to serve a legitimate end in a way that is compatible with the maintenance of our system of representative government. So you can burden the freedom, but only to secure that proper and appropriate end. And it was held that the law only burdens the freedom of communication about government or political matters. And so that's the, if you like, the limitation of it. And so what do we have here? This legislation doesn't deal, in my observation, with political communication. It does not, because the behaviour it captures and seeks to prevent, in order to prevent harassment and intimidation of women accessing these services, the behaviour is not one of seeking to engage in a discourse about public affairs. It does not seek to prescribe behaviour of persons seeking to have a public discussion about the state of the law, whether that's about abortion or about any other topic. It does not in any way inhibit, prevent or restrict people's right in other public places to have those discussions about wide matters of political subject matter or public affairs, to inform the public whether in relation to an electoral process, which is really where the implied freedom has its operation, or even to inform the public more generally about issues such as abortion. When you take away all the trappings, all the window dressing that many of the people who've written to us have tried to dress it up in, and many of the contributions we've heard here today, what the activities that this bill seeks to address are actually all about are to try, one way or another, to persuade individuals to not seek medical treatment. It's not trying to engage someone on their way to a clinic about abortion law generally, but about whether they should undertake or have access to a particular service. And of course, in that way I've just described it, there is a judgment on the part of those who are, to use a term that we've heard here today, sidewalk counsellors. There is an assumption that everybody going in and out of these places is after one particular type of service. And as we heard here from the Honourable Sarah Mitchell, and of course others have made the observation, the reason women attend these places is for a wide variety of medical need. But there is a judgment that they're there for one purpose. And so these sidewalk counsellors and their urges and spruikers are not there to engage in a wide-ranging discussion about public affairs or even about abortion law reform. They're there to persuade these individuals to not seek medical treatment. And so let's just change the setting a little bit. Imagine protesters of this kind were trying to prevent people accessing a clinic to undertake chemotherapy for cancer. We would have no hesitation in the context in which this bill arises by saying interfering or impeding or intimidating people from doing that is heinous and a stop should be put to it, or whether these protesters were trying to stop people from accessing blood transfusions or other life-saving procedures, organ transplants, for example. If you looked at it in that way, most members, I think, would reach the view that legislation in this setting was necessary to ensure safe access to medical services. Because that's what this bill is about. The Honourable Trevor Khan in his contribution said, and I agree, that bill is about a matter of common decency. This bill is so that women, we know, can safely access important medical services. And it's not about political communication, and it's not about ideology, and it's not about philosophy, and it's not about what you or I believe the way the world should run. It's about people who make an informed decision about accessing medical services should be allowed to do that. We've heard a lot of talk here today about the High Court's decision in Brown. I'm not going to labour you all with some legal analysis, but I'll just make one point. Why did the High Court strike that case down? Because it wasn't just to protect the right to protest. And it was this. Because the legislation set up a regime which was said to have as its legitimate aim the protection of lawful forestry operations and public safety, the safety of individuals, safety of workers, and that was the stated aim. But the judges of the High Court found that the powers of direction, removal and arrest and the offences created by the legislation were in fact not to secure those aims of public safety and the permission of lawful activity, but to stop protest in an area per se. That's why the High Court struck down that legislation in Brown. And the legislation that we're debating here today does not seek to stop protest or silent prayer or sidewalk counselling, but to say you cannot do it in a particular space for reasons which are legitimate and appropriately and proportionally adapted to the evil, the harassment of individuals, and to provide that safe zone. You can protest or have your silent prayer vigils at the outskirts of the 150 metre zone. It doesn't stop you from protesting or having your prayer vigil. It's been said there's been no need for the bill because existing law covers the behaviours that we seek to prescribe. But that's true only in part. To come within the grasp of the criminal law, offending has to be at a high level, and as we've heard, I think from the Honourable Bronnie Taylor, there are a lot of hoops for individuals to jump through to commence a criminal action. And also move-on powers are only short-term, and those who are moved on can return within a short space of time. So just look at the issue of harassment and intimidation. Yes, violence is illegal and there are laws that deal with that. But women who are in the vulnerable circumstance that leads them to attend clinics and reproductive health centres, they're highly sensitive. They are going through a difficult time. Sometimes the mere presence of people praying, displaying literature, seeking to approach them is very threatening and intimidating to them, whereas in a different circumstance where they were feeling more robust, it would not be. They are not being protected by the existing law from feeling harassed and intimidated in those circumstances. Mr. President, there's a fundamental disconnect in terms of what we're describing here because, on the one hand, many of the opponents of the bill have talked about it's only silent prayer and it's only trying to provide people with another choice, a legitimate alternative choice. And we've also heard speakers saying, well, women are getting harassed and intimidated, people are approaching them, are seeking to impede their access into these facilities. I have seen that with my own eyes. I know these things go on. Not everybody engages in that kind of activity, but the overstepping of the mark in this context is so often and repeated that the law needs to intervene. And of course, in the last couple of weeks, we've even seen television footage about what goes on outside some of the clinics. The law is currently inadequate. It needs to change, and this bill is that change. Street walk counsellors, sidewalk counsellors. They're not qualified to be counsellors. They're well-meaning, perhaps, in some circumstances. But what people attending clinics seeking these services need are qualified professionals to provide them with guidance and support, not a well-meaning volunteer who may in fact end up doing more harm than good. These people are not qualified professionals. In the correspondence and in the contributions we've heard, we're being told that these people are simply seeking to provide choice for women. I have to say that is a very disturbing spin on what we're discussing here today. Because its subtext is that any woman attending these clinics, seeking these services, has not thought long and hard about doing so over days and perhaps weeks before they decide to seek out these medical services. The arrogance of that assumption is frankly breathtaking. And let's just look at this question, that at this most difficult personal and private time, would any woman want to discuss these matters with a total stranger not qualified to give them counselling, and to do so, Mr. President, in public, on the sidewalk, to talk about this most personal and private matter that they're experiencing? When you paint that picture, you can see how ludicrous and how false this proposition is. It's not what is going on. And the arrogance of people who say that that's what is going on invites the reasonable observer to think that they are completely disconnected from the real world. There's been lots of letters and correspondence to members of Parliament. Perhaps unwisely, I've chosen to respond to a number of them. Many in support of the bill, some less so. And I've tried politely but firmly to express my view. You can imagine how nonplussed I have felt when, instead of engaging in a respectful discourse, the responses have come back in terminology that is vicious, sometimes frankly unhinged, but in language that is colourful and indeed violent. Because this is the real subtext of the opposition to this bill. Not to support women and give them choice, but to bend them to people's worldview. That people should behave as these people think people should behave, rather than to make their own informed choice. And by suggesting that women need to be given choice is to say that they're not making that informed choice, that somehow they lack the capacity. And I think that is terribly, terribly insulting. So this is the real agenda I see in the opposition to this bill. Not offering women a real choice, but to try and make women behave as they think they should behave. And if you don't accept that, then you are called to judgment, and you are marked down, and you are subject to harassment, just as the women seeking medical services are themselves harassed and intimidated. Sometimes by the mere presence of people, but more often because those people seek to impede them and to approach them and to deliberately harass them. And that is not acceptable, and this law will put a stop to it. And I have to say this, my party does not have a free vote about this, not because we don't believe in conscience, but because this is not a conscience matter. This is about the integrity of access to medical services in this state. This is about law enforcement measures, and that is why we as a party are voting this way. I understand other parties have taken a different approach, and that is a matter for them. But for us, this is an important matter of public policy, and we stand together on it. Mr. President, this law will protect women. It will ensure the integrity of the provision of health services in this state. It will also help to protect the workers at these clinics. It will promote a safer, more civilised and respectful society. I commend this bill to the House.